individual consumer, a household, a firm. Often it's the so-called representative agent. So it's the typical kind of consumer. Yeah. And the decision maker is confronted with a choice problem, hence rational choice, where he or she is already equipped with a full set of preferences. We will talk about this also in a second, about what the goals and objectives of a certain actor are. And then the actor sort of prices in situational constraints. Yeah, so for instance, a cost function, yeah, so that a household is not just a utility function, so rather wants to spend more time on leisure activity than working, and has to price in the cost that leisure activity is expensive, and not receiving a wage opportunity costs are also expensive. So that would be a situational constraint. A typical situational constraint in the economics version of the rational choice model is obviously then the market prices, which are usually in a competitive market in these models taken for granted, or just are not determined by actors, but they have to be taken. Okay. Then I already mentioned, I mean, it's called rational choice theory. So what's rational about it is instrumental rationality. So the preferences which are ordered in a rational way are also subject to certain assumptions. So these are purely formal criteria of rationality. So also recall Max Weber's distinction, right, between formal and substantive rationality. Here we are dealing with a theory that is purely relying on formal criteria of rationality. It does not make any substantive ethical statements about which goals, which preferences are good or bad. Yeah. And this may be a criticism of the theory, right? But for now, let's accept it as it is. So basic assumptions here is that an actor has a complete set of references. So whatever the situation, an actor is equipped with sort of a preference, an opinion about what he or she prefers. It's a transitive set of preferences. That is, if I prefer A over B and B over C, I also prefer A over C. Yeah, so this is the condition of transitivity that the set of preferences needs to live up to. And they should also be consistent. That is, I cannot simultaneously hold the preference to prefer A and another preference of not preferring A. Yeah? So logical consistency. And these are the most important assumptions for calling an actor's set of preferences then also rational. Yeah? So then come the information assumptions, where the easiest models in rational choice just presuppose perfect information, right? In order to make a choice about different alternatives, A, B, C, the rational actor needs to have knowledge or like beliefs about the world with which probability do these different events then also occur. And then the basic assumption is that there's perfect information. If there's incomplete information, and these are then more complicated models, then there needs also to be certain assumptions about information costs. So at which point is it not beneficial anymore to gather further information because it just becomes too costly. Okay, so with the given information, then actors also have, let's say, a tremendous calculating power in order to determine the probability with which certain events in the world or certain actions by others occur in order to attribute also the likelihood with which certain action outcomes may really realize. Yeah? And with all of this then in place, actors are able to calculate their maximum utility in case they are households, or their maximum profits in case they are companies, and so on. Yeah. So this is the basic theory which was designed rather to understand economic action, but what happened then in the 1950s in the political sciences, 60s, 70s, rather in sociology, is that these theories were extended also in other social domains than just the economy, for instance, into the family, most famously by the economist Gary Becker, or also discrimination, crime, law, education, and eventually also political behavior through theories that are called public choice. And well, sociologists responded obviously to this with the term economic imperialism to describe how these basic economics theories then entered their proper domain, and in the 1970s, 80s responded with the development of economic sociology, a subdiscipline of sociology that in a way fought back and started to apply sociological theories and methods, network theory, for instance, to the study of economic phenomena. Yeah? But this is basically not to deny that in the wake of this economic imperialism ever since, there's been a strong methodological influence of rational choice theory on political science, most notably, but there has also been the import of rational choice theories into sociology, such that there is a huge, I would say, even subdiscipline of rational choice inspired sociology nowadays. Yeah. And we already encountered actually one of the, let's say, Bibles of this sociology, and this is James Coleman's book here, The Foundations of Social Theory of 1990. And we had encountered it in the context of Coleman's boat being applied to Max Weber's Protestant thesis. Yeah? And this is just to recall the explanatory level also of the rational choice impetus here in sociology, where Coleman's boat stands for the claim that any kind of explanation in sociology should be or should have micro foundations. Yeah? And Coleman's boat displays a little bit what this means. And I briefly just go through it because we encountered this in the Weber lecture already. Whenever you encounter a macro association as the one between the prevalence of Protestants in a certain area or country and the development of rational capitalism, yeah, so a macro association that you find with structural variables of the kind GDP and religious affiliation of the population, then this in order to make for a proper sociological explanation, needs to have three further ingredients to basically micro-found this explanation. And the first one is to specify the link between the macro and the micro level. So how actually does Protestantism or these Protestantist doctrines or any kind of social conditions then act on the individual? Then comes, secondly, an individual level explanation, a micro explanation of action. And thirdly, we need to specify some kind of aggregation mechanism. And we saw in the Protestant ethic reconstruction that then the iron cage is something, or competition, competitive pressure also is something of the aggregation mechanism used there. And the second example here is the explanation of revolutions. For instance, in works like Why Men Rebel by Tuer of the 1950s and 60s, there was an important theory about why revolutions take place, where an observation was that paradoxically they often happened after social conditions actually had improved. And this was then explained through this threefold step, also in a micro-foundation way, by improved social conditions, opening up, let's say, a new kind of reference frame for comparisons. So in relative social deprivation theory, sort of your level of frustration or satisfaction does not necessarily depend on the absolute level of, for instance, the provision of rights or goods, economic goods or political rights, but it rather depends on you comparing it to something. And this something can be a reference group. It can be also a sort of a reference frame of you comparing yourself to a prior sort of moment in time. And in this explanation here of revolution, then the improved social conditions had generated more and more expectations, like in a way of a linear extrapolation, that conditions would improve even further. And relative to this expectation, then there was more and more frustration, which on the individual level led to more aggression. This is just individual level, and the aggregation function in this case would be collective action, protests, and eventually then the revolution. And this then being a second case for a successful micro-foundation of a macro-level association. And this is something like one of the stock models also for opposing a pure macro sociology. So you may ask, why is it actually necessary to have micro foundations at all? Why can't I just use macro level associations as Durkheim did? So some of the arguments in favor that then rational choices give is that lower level units basically, so first of all, there are better data available, but there's also a more fine-grained measurement than possible. So whenever it's possible, therefore, it's better to go on a lower level because just measurement is easy. And this is particularly important to circumvent a problem that you may already know as ecological fallacy, that is an erroneous inference from higher level associations to lower level ones. Yeah? So I think I mentioned this in Weber's context. So when you have many regions in Germany, for instance, you find that the regions with more Protestants also show higher levels of GDP development. And your conclusion is that it's the individual level Protestants that are richer. Yeah? And this would be the case of a potential ecological fallacy where you derive an individual level conclusion about individual level Protestants being richer from the regional macro level association. And why is it a fallacy? Well, because it may be the case that let's say, richer, the higher GDP in the richer regions is incidentally or coincidentally produced by the Catholics in these regions, so the individual Catholics. It could potentially be the case there may